Becky.
Morning, Jim. Morning, Ollie.
Morning.
Morning, David.
Hi, Becky.
Morning, Becky.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Board Chair Postman, members Garrett and Bollendroff, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and recording has begun.
Thank you, Dustin. Good morning, everybody. We'll convene the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board Caucus meeting for Tuesday, August 2nd, 2022. Our first item is a program review of canned cocktails at sports and entertainment facilities. And we will hear from Nicola Reed, the Compliance and Adjudications Manager, and Becky Smith, the Licensing and Regulations Director. Turn it over to the two of you.
You want to just jump in and talk about why we received the request and what we're doing here today?
Yes. So good morning, Chair Postman, Board Member Garrett and Bollendroff. So licensing is coming before you today to discuss canned cocktails of 8% alcohol or less to be sold at sports entertainment facilities, but more specific to the allowing of it to be consumed within general seating. So back in 1996, the legislature passed a bill that created the Sports Entertainment Facility License. And throughout that bill, it spoke about spirits, beer and wine being sold at sporting or event type venues throughout the arena. We further clarified within the agency in rule of what areas we would allow specific types of drinks. And so currently in rule, beer and wine is allowed to be consumed within general seating. And then there is a clause within the rule that says any level of service that is outside the matrix, which currently outlines what type of alcohol can be consumed where, needs to come before the board for consideration. And so some history on where we've been with cocktails, pre-made, batched, or canned. So around 2019, the board entered into its first pilot program with a licensee, and they initially started with pre-made batched spirit cocktails of 8% or less to be brought through the general seating. They were on a pilot program for 2 years, and they were successful in it, and now that has gone into a permanent program status. Later on, they did add the canned cocktails of 8% or less alcohol by volume. And to date, there has been no concerns with that licensee. In the last couple of years, the board has also approved 2 other pilot programs for sports entertainment facilities that are serving the pre-made batched spirit cocktails in addition to canned cocktails. Both pilots seem to be going well. We have a collaboration with enforcement and the licensee. And to date, there does not seem to be any increased public safety risk or concerns by adding this level of service. So recently, we have received many requests for the canned cocktails alone. And so this is why we're coming before you today. We are requesting that if a sports entertainment facility is requesting canned cocktails only of 8% or less alcohol by volume, a licensing manager would look into the operations of the licensee, of course, to ensure that there are not any violation histories or concerns with enforcement that might cause pause to granting this approval. We would also ask that they include the canned cocktails in their operating plan, speak to how they would mitigate any potential additional risk of having this type of drink. We also really ensure that they have clear, distinguished drink containers. So if they have canned cocktails, White Claws, beers in cans, things of that nature, we ask that their non-alcoholic drinks be in water bottle type, plastic bottles, or cups with straws. So if an enforcement officer or an employee of the licensee was walking around, they would have an easier time kind of figuring out what someone has in their hands. Again, we would make sure the licensee does not have a history of public safety violations. And we would also have the licensee attest that should any concerns arise or public safety issues increase after the approval of the canned cocktails, that they are agreeing that licensing can pull back that approval. So one thing we are differentiating is the canned cocktail and the pre-made batched spirit cocktail. We do feel like with the pre-made, there is more room for human error, and it is a little trickier to test for the alcohol by volume. And so we're proposing that we treat these two separate ways. So if there is a licensee that meets the items that we would be looking into, licensing is asking for approval to be able to issue this approval and not have to inundate the board with these types of requests. Now, that being said, if a licensee was not meeting the requirements that we have listed above, or if there were circumstances outside of the norm, then we would definitely still draft up a pilot program and come before the board for a decision. So anything that wouldn't really fall aligned with kind of just a pre-streamlined review and approval, we would then bring it before the board for consideration still. With the pre-made batch spirit cocktails, if this is being asked solely or with the canned cocktails, then we would come before the board for consideration. Just because of the, there is the margin for human error. The testing of it can be a little trickier, and we just feel like there's less room for error with the canned cocktails. And so, if the board approves, we would again just ask that if a licensee met the qualifications and enforcement had no concerns, that we would go ahead and issue the ability to add canned cocktails with the ability for us to pull it back if operations start to go sideways, and that we would maintain our current status of coming before the board with a written up pilot program for consideration for pre-made batched or for any canned cocktail that doesn't falls out of the streamlined process for one reason or another, or if the circumstance, consideration, or event type is not one that we normally see. Are there any questions I can answer for you today regarding the paper or canned cocktails in general?
I've got one quick one. So I'm a little confused about the interplay between the canned and the pre-batch. Are we phasing out the pre-batched and saying you can do service in the seats, but it has to be canned, or either?
We're not phasing out either. We're just asking to be able to approve by a manager the canned cocktail alone if the qualifiers are met. The pre-made batched, we would still come before the board for consideration, just because we feel there's a bit of a difference in the margin for human error versus a canned cocktail and a pre-made. So we would follow two different paths for the drink types.
And if they're using pre-batch today in some of, like the one pilot program where we were talking about, if they have areas already where that's allowed, will they just, can they continue that, or do they need to re-ask for pre-batch? Anyway.
For pre-batch, the two current pilot programs we have today did go before the board and are approved. So they are on their 1 year pilot program status. We'll be checking in with them at 6 months. And at the 1 year mark, we would come before the board to seek a continuance of the pilot program if there were any concerns, or to possibly grant it into a more permanent status. So they would not have to change anything they are currently doing.
And both of those pilots also have canned already. They have approval to have cans back, 8% back in their seats as well. And then just so you mentioned, I just want to also mention that we'll be tracking this. So we'll be able to periodically send our enforcement staff out to those areas that do have canned cocktails, just like we've done with the pilot, to make sure things are going okay. That that we will be reviewing these as a team, like we do with axe throwing, to make sure that we haven't missed any any areas of concern.
Yeah, to echo what Becky said, monthly enforcement sends us an overview of their visits. We're collaborating with them. They're making sure that they get out to sports entertainment facilities, especially ones with pilot programs or increased levels of service. So we really get an idea of how the operations are going. And those report outs are sent to licensing monthly that we are capturing in a tracking sheet.
Okay. Jim, you had a question.
Yeah, just for my education, because I wasn't here when these were originally approved, where are the two pilot projects right now?
So the one that is in permanent status is T-Mobile, and the two pilot programs are Levy at Lumen Field and Climate Pledge Arena.
Okay, and I'm assuming there have not been any incidents or significant concerns on the part of the LCB staff?
No, there's been a great partnership with the licensee, enforcement and licensing. The licensees have been really open to any feedback, if needed at the time, and things seem to be moving ahead great.
Great. So two other follow-up questions. One is just another curiosity. I have a lot of curiosities. One of them is how did we come up with 8%? Where did that come from?
That was initially proposed by the first licensee, I believe. That Becky, you could probably speak to it more, but I think initially when the board was considering this, I can't recall if the licensee proposed it or if licensing. Becky might have more insight into that.
Yeah, it was actually a proposal by the licensee. They were trying to keep the volume lower than that of some of the beers that they have on tap. As you know, that some of those IPAs are about 10%. And so they were, that getting something like this approved was more for the customer, right? In the customer's experience. So that's where we got the 8%.
Okay, and I'm assuming that the limitation on the number of cocktails somebody can purchase is the same as other facilities where it's limited to 2 at per interaction, or
Two
It
per
is.
transaction.
Transaction.
Yes,
Okay,
still
thank you.
remains the same. Yes.
And that will also be included in the plan. So the plan that goes forward, that we always have a plan that the licensees have to fill out. And so in that, it will speak to the fact that 2 drinks, will be served per customer.
Okay, and I'm sorry, one final thing, and
It's
I'm sure
totally fine, Tim.
I'm
You're
sure I know
absolutely
the
fine.
I'm sure I know the answer to this, but I just want to ask. That's limit to 2 total. Like I can't buy 2 beers and 2 canned cocktails. It's 2 total, regardless of the type of alcohol that I'm purchasing, beer, wine, or spirits. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 2
Thank you.
total. And if you have someone with you standing right there, they will also check the ID of that individual with you to ensure that you're not buying for a minor.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to have a correction on, Jim, you asked about how the experience has been, and I do want to make sure that we're, that we provide consistency in responding, and that's that things had not gone, that we had some concerns with a couple of the pilots, but what was great about those pilots is that they did respond quickly, that they did make some changes into both how many enforcement staff that they had working for them. Their different points of sales were decreased, that that having more staff in other places around the student sections, for instance, at the universities. And so I want to make sure that you understand that as we meet with folks, that it's not always things are great. Sometimes it's like things are not great. What's going on and how can we improve? What we never want to get is to the end of that pilot and say, we're not going to approve you for another year because all of these things have gone wrong. We throughout the year have conversations with those folks, so everybody's on the same page. And Nicola's right, communication is key to making these pilots work and increasing the level of service, because as we know that not everything needs to have a huge increase of level of service. So
yeah. Thank you for that. Hey, just FYI, one thing that I've done recently is Dustin's worked with me to get an open invitation to community groups and individuals as by way of introduction. And I have an upcoming meeting with the folks at Lumen Field. And so I probably will check in with you before that meeting just to check in and see if there's anything that I should know going into that meeting.
Happy to meet with you. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie, can you just tell us then, you're going to bring us a memo for consideration tomorrow at the board meeting,
Yes.
right? And
Yes,
what exactly does that do? Does that then we still would consider pilot programs if they came to that separately from that, or does this now give you guys the authority to just do those?
So yes, I'll be at the board meeting tomorrow, and for the canned cocktail only, if the requirements are met and there's no concerns, it would give the authority to a manager within licensing, and we all collaborate in the leadership team to be able to issue that approval contingent on the applicant attest or licensee attesting that, if public safety risk increases, we can definitely pull that level of service back. If any thing falls without the common denominator, we would still come before the board for a canned cocktail, and we will always still come before the board for consideration for pre-made batched spirit cocktails.
Okay, great, good. Okay, seeing no more questions for you, we will see you tomorrow then. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Our next item is continuing a little more board meeting prep and a rules update from Dr. Kathy Hoffman and her team. And I will just turn it over to you and let you steer us through. I know you got a couple of things you're going to handle yourself there. So good morning.
Good morning, Chair Postman, and good morning, board members Garrett and Bollendroth. I do have a lot to update you on today. August is going to be a busy month for the policy and rules team, so I'll try to keep this as brief as I can, but there is a lot of activity in policy and rules this month. So starting off with the monthly rules update, I'll start with that, and then going to do something a little different today and just give you an overview of the rule petitions we've received as well. So you're aware, because they will all be coming to the board meeting for, or the recommendations on those rule petitions largely will be coming to the board meeting on August 31st. So there's a number of them that just in general the strokes about what's happening with those rule petitions or the requests that we received. So to start with alcohol rules in progress, pardon me. The project to implement Senate Bill 5940, so that concerns contract packaging services endorsement, is scheduled for hearing on August 31st. That's another thing that'll happen at the board meeting on the 31st. To date, no written comments have been received on that package, and that package was approved on July 20. So if there are no substantive comments received or comments that would change the rule proposal, at the public hearing on the 31st, we could bring the CR 103 to you as early as September 14th. And if that happens, the rules would be effective on or about October 15th. So that's it for alcohol rules in progress at this point. So any questions there before we move on? Okay. Moving on to cannabis rules in progress, pardon me. With respect to the THC compound work, Robert led a successful listen and learn session this last Thursday. So that was July 28th, with approximately 45 people in virtual attendance. And a few comments were received during that session. 3 more followed after the session. We'll take a look at those and determine what our next steps will be. And we'll make that determination within the next couple of weeks, whether or not to move on with the rule revisions, what steps to take next. We do have 2 projects that will be initiated also by the end of the month, and those concern cannabis plant canopy and cannabis advertising. So Jeff will bring the CR 101 to you by the end of the month for the canopy rules, and Robert will bring the CR 101 for you with respect to cannabis advertising also by the end of the month. We do anticipate these projects will bring significant opportunities for stakeholder engagement and revisions that really reflect our current regulatory and authorizing environments. And both sections are due for an update. And of course, tomorrow I'll be bringing the new CR2 concerning social equity in cannabis, and I'll speak to that in a minute. So any questions on that? Okay. So moving into general rulemaking, Audrey will bring the expedited rule package to you at the August 17th board meeting that updates email and physical addresses throughout LCB rules as a whole. And if approved, she's planning on bringing the CR 103 to you for presentation, assuming no comments are received during the open public comment period on October 26th. And that would make an effective date of November 26th for those revisions. So again, that's an expedited process where there's no public hearing involved. They're just technical changes.
Why do we need rules at all for that? Just wondering.
I think these are rules related to, and I'll hand it over to Audrey here for a second just to provide any additional feedback here. But there's physical addresses provided in our rules for public disclosure.
Oh, okay, right.
And so the physical address that was listed is currently our old headquarters address. I think we're going to be taking out things like phone numbers, things that'll change, can change.
Okay,
And sometimes those things are added in rule, and it takes a rule change to change a phone number in rule. So idea is to take that out.
good. And
Update
we could
email.
just say, in the rule, we could just say the phone number or
Yes,
the email address that's available. Okay, good. That makes sense. Thank you.
exactly, right. Audrey, did I miss anything there? I just want to bump it over to you quickly before we move on.
That covers it, Kathy.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. Okay, so before I move into board prep, I want to touch on just again, in general terms, the many rule petitions we received. We received another rule petition yesterday as well. So this has been a busy July and August for the rules team. So on July 6th, we received 2 petitions that are sort of similar concerning the allowance of minors in licensed cannabis production and processing businesses. So one asks us to consider making the temporary allowance of minors under 16 on those premises when in-person schools were closed during the pandemic. So the person's asking us to make that a permanent rule change. The other petition asks us to consider allowing the employees of contractors engaged in construction, like plumbing, HVAC work, electrical work, those sorts of things, who are over 16 to be on licensed cannabis premises. So Robert will be providing staff recommendations on these petitions at the end of the month. On July 8th, we received a petition to update and streamline provisions of WAC 314-55096. That concerns cannabis vendor educational and internal quality control samples. And Jeff will be providing the staff recommendations on that at the end of the month as well. Also on July 8th, we received a petition to amend the record keeping requirements of WAC 314-55083 and 87 to allow for cloud storage options. So those are 2 cannabis related rules. So although this petition, suggested these changes, again, just for cannabis rules, we're also considering whether or not there are implications for other rules within the LCB's authority, such as those pertaining to alcohol, etc. So Audrey will be providing staff recommendations for that petition. On July 11th, we received a petition to allow by rule cannabis producers to package their own cannabis and sell it directly to retailers. And Audrey will be providing the staff recommendation for this petition, not at tomorrow's board meeting, but likely on August 17th. Let's see, I think there's one more here. Yes. To remove the residual solvent limits of 5,000 parts per million for ethanol from cannabis rule, that's 314-55-102. And Jeff will be providing staff recommendation for this petition also at the end of the month. So all of our recommendations, with the exception of the direct sales request, will come to you by the end of the month. So again, it's going to be a busy board meeting. And additionally, in addition to the petition we received yesterday that I think I'll talk to you about later, not at a different meeting, we did receive another rule petition last week on July 28th to amend 314-40-046 sub 6 to allow clubs to add 1 additional membership drive per calendar quarter and host consecutive membership drives during 1 quarter per calendar year. And this pertains to alcohol service. So Audrey will be providing the recommendation for that in probably mid-September. So I know that was a lot to digest. Again, not going to do this in the board meeting tomorrow, but just wanted you to make you aware of the rule petitions we were receiving and what they pertain to. So I will stop and take a breath, ask if there's any questions.
A couple, one on, did you mention I just saw a new one today, or I was away, so I don't know how new it was on, and maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, on, sale of Oregon wine to
Yes.
Washington.
Yes, that was a
You don't
petition.
need to
we-
explain it to me now exactly, but
Right.
I read the memo and I don't get that one.
Okay,
Someone's
we'll
gonna have to
discuss that with-
explain it to
yeah.
me.
More
Okay,
to come on that, but yes, that was the roll petition we received yesterday. Yeah.
okay. And on rules petitions, there isn't built-in stakeholder input, is there, between receiving and the recommendation that comes to the board, right?
Yeah, that
Okay.
is correct. There is not
Okay.
input.
Okay, but good. I'm glad we've let people know all the pile of them that we've got waiting here. If
Yeah,
anyone has anything to
there's
share.
there's quite a few, and I do have to say it's kind of unusual to receive this many in this short a period of time. Usually they're spread out throughout the year, you know, sprinkled here and there.
Yeah.
And sometimes we see sort of a, you know, more than one or two towards the end of the year as well. But yeah, this is highly unusual for us to receive them at this concentration.
Yeah, both alcohol
this
and
many.
cannabis,
Yeah,
too.
both alcohol and cannabis, right?
Yeah, okay.
Right. All right, so any other questions? And then move into board prep.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so of course, we are bringing the new CR 102 for the social equity and cannabis rules to you tomorrow for your consideration and hopefully approval. And so because there might be people who aren't familiar with this project listening in, I just like to provide a little bit of procedural history around the work. And of course, this is memorialized in the memo that's part of your package and has been released with the board agenda. So to go back in time a little bit, we filed the CR 101 for this project on October 27th of last year. And the public comment period for that CR 101 ended on December 17th, and no comments were received. Our rule development really followed two tracks. One was to provide revisions and updates to existing licensing rules, and the other was to create a new rules section, and that's the proposal that you reviewed before, but we'll be reviewing again tomorrow, and that's the creation of new rules section 314.55.570. We hosted a virtual listen and learn session on draft conceptual rules, and that was for the first proposal on March 23rd. And there were over 120 individuals in attendance. It was one of our longer listen and learn sessions, and quite a bit of feedback was received during that session. That feedback was used to finalize our proposal that was presented to you, excuse me, and you approved on April 13th, 2022, so this year. And as we reviewed that proposal after it had been approved and filed, we considered comment received, thought about all of the work that we've done up to this point, and there has been significant work on this rule set. We opted to withdraw that proposal on May 11 to allow more time for research, outreach, and analysis. And so the culmination of those efforts are contained in the proposal that I'll bring to you tomorrow, and hopefully for filing. So for your convenience, and it's part of the package provided to you, there's a comparison table, and it's offered as attachment H in the CR 102 memo. And there's multiple highlights. I don't know if you'd like to go through each of those today, but I'll just touch on the parts that have been changed. So for instance, we expanded the definition of family member to include a sibling of a child as defined within the section, and then domestic partners, and made one other little tweak to the language in the definition. It just really expands the definition for clarity. We added the word we added the word program to the definition of social equity applicant to make it clear that there's a difference between just a social equity applicant and a social equity program applicant, because it just seemed to make that definition more clear. We struck some language from the definition of social equity contractor, just again to make that definition more clear. We added language to social equity licensee, again, to make that distinction between a social equity program applicant and an actual social equity licensee, so that there's a distinction between the two. And then we also added the definition of social equity title certificate holder. The original proposal didn't contain that, but it made sense to add that here. So I'll stop there with definitions and ask if there's any questions.
I think I'm gonna hold them till tomorrow.
The CR 102 memo.
I'll find it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I have to say it's a substantial document, and that really does reflect the considerable amount of work and outreach that went into this project. And we wanted to make sure we memorialize that in this memo to the extent possible. We also, let's see, moving on to 314.55.570 sub 2, proposed, I should say. We revised the period of time for disproportionately impacted areas. So in the rule text, we originally said that a person needed to reside in a DIA for a minimum of 6 months. We changed that to 5 years between 1980 and 2010 to really distinguish, who was living at that time in that area at that specific time period. Then moving on to the social equity application process. Again, we moved into, and I'm looking specifically at the scoring rubric updates, because that's really where some changes were made. We removed the reference to that 6 months time period that I just referenced and updated that to the 5-year time frame that I referenced. And then we also increased points from 20 to 40 for that particular element. We also increased points for drug offense, conviction from 5 points to 10 points. We increased the points for a cannabis offense conviction from 20 to 40 points. We increased the points for cannabis offense conviction type. So there's, a fine, probation, confined to home, etc. We doubled all of those. We added arrests to home loss or ability to purchase a home related to conviction. So previously it just said you could receive points if you'd suffered home loss or the ability to purchase a home related to conviction. We now say arrest or conviction. We increased points for owning or operating a dispensary licensed as a business before July 1, 2016, excuse me. So we increased that from 5 to 10 points and really zoned in on the language there, made it very specific. And we also added points for dispensary ownership or operation licensed as a business in a DIA. That is now 30 points. So added points there. And just one minor correction in the rubric, and that was to remove the reference to title certificate holders. That didn't change points at all. So overall, that increases the points from, I believe it was 250 to now 320.
And I know I asked you this when we were working on this, but remind me. On the dispensary piece, you get 5 to 10 points if you operated and 30 points if you operated within a DIA. Are those cumulative or one or the other?
I think it can be cumulative. I'll refer to Becky here, but I do believe that is cumulative for a total, because the total you can receive is 320. So I don't think it's one. Well, wait a minute. Hold on a second. Let me look at the rule, David. Hang on.
And you can get back to me tomorrow. That
Okay.
would be fine too.
I believe there's an or in between those two qualifiers, but I'll double check for you.
Okay.
Ollie's nodding her head. I think it may be an
okay.
or. So I do
Okay.
apologize.
That's fine. Yeah, we can revisit that tomorrow.
Right.
And David, I don't know if you found the document, but it's attachment H in the document. H,
Yeah, I've
yeah.
got the document. I just haven't
Okay.
made it that far.
Okay.
I'm getting
Yeah, and to do the comparison, I didn't plug the rubric into the actual document. I think the document is so unwieldy as it is. I'm trying to keep it as minimized as possible, but.
Yep. Okay.
Right.
All right. Any other questions for at this point? Okay, go ahead. Back to you.
All right, so moving into the next proposed section, and that's subsection 4, that concerns additional provisions. Added a little bit of language to license transfer assumption, and struck a little bit of language just for clarity's sake and to address the assumption language. So not a big change there, but a clarifying change. And then a new section was added. That's 314.55, 570 sub 5. That has to do with a title certificate holder. So that provides that a title certificate holder meeting the requirements of a social equity program applicant as determined by the social equity contractor can reinstate their license anywhere within the county that they hold their certificate. So new section there. And then finally, so we numbered old section 5. Of course, it turned into subsection 6. And the only change there was just the number of the subsection. There's no change to the content or the substance of the proposed subsection. So if approved for filing tomorrow, I'll file with the code revisor. Hearing will be scheduled for September 14th. Under that timeline, the soonest we can consider adoption is September 28th, with an effective date very shortly thereafter. And just a couple points I want to emphasize here before we move into any questions. Even under that timeline, it's going to take some time for the agency to operationalize these rules. We do anticipate being able to accept applications in late fall, early winter. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes to build the infrastructure to make this program work. And there's multiple pieces to the program. I'll pause there. But I really want to reach out again to licensing and thank them for their extraordinary collaborative work on this effort, the care that they've taken in the research and thoughtfulness in the scoring rubric, and all the work that's gone into making this program what we hope will be a successful initial social equity program for Washington State. And I will stop.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to add my endorsement of the work of licensing as well as yours as well. But licensing led the way, and I think we have a really substantive package in front of us, and look forward to more conversation about it tomorrow. One of the other things I'd be interested in, just to be prepared for tomorrow, just there, we're waiting for data on what is what area is economically distressed and things, like an update on that as well, and anything like that as we start to look at what the actual rollout of this would be to what would be the best case for when we could start accepting applications,
Yes.
of that sort. Questions at this point for good doctor?
No questions, but just follow up and saying Kathy and license, a lot of work time and conversations went into this. So you guys did great. I know.
And thank you for your continued support of this work. I think I can speak for licensing, and I'll just go ahead and do it, but we truly appreciate the ongoing support and assistance with this important work. Thank you.
And I'll just add that my thanks as well, and licensing and rules, the work you've done. And as somebody who's kind of come in mid-process, actually late in the process, and I've just been very impressed with the work that I've seen and the attempt to do this well. And the document that you put together with the original proposal versus the revised proposal was especially helpful for somebody like me. So thank you so much.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
And helpful for someone like me once I found it. So yeah, unfortunately I found it when you were on the last item. So, but I'll study it now between now and tomorrow. Okay, anything more on social equity? Everybody?
That's it, and that's it for our rules update.
Okay, great. Thank you
All
for all
right.
of that. We will see you tomorrow for consideration of the 102.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, they got a lot of work going on. So now we'll be joined by our director, Rick Garza, who has an important new employee to introduce. I'll turn this over to you first.
Thank you, Chair Postman, board members, Garrett, Bollendroff. I haven't been in this room for a meeting in 2.5 years. So
Wow.
I was in the building, so I figured I had to join you today. So thanks for the opportunity. I wanted to share a little bit. As you know, Gretchen Frost, my capable executive for over 10 years, has moved on to take a part-time position with the board. And in that process, helped me find Gloria Hong, who is my new executive assistant. Just a little bit about Gloria. She comes from South Puget Sound Community College, where she most recently served as executive assistant to vice president for student services. In that capacity, she managed budgets within her division, coordinated college events, and provided executive level briefings. One thing I'll share with you in her cover letter that she wrote, one of the many reasons why I thought she'd just be a wonderful fit with us. I pride myself in the ability to work with diverse individuals, and I'm dedicated in assisting them whenever needed. I feel it is necessary to create a great rapport with my colleagues and those I come into contact with because it reflects upon the organization that I work for. So Gloria, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm sorry it took a while for us to get you in front of our other board members, but I wanted to give a second to say hello, if you would, please. Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, I came in the higher education and so was able to work. I'm super excited to join LCB, and I was actually born and raised over here in Thurston County, so I am a Washingtonian through and through. I received my master's degree back in 2015, so very eager to learn and experience new things. And I have 2 young kids that is in the system, so yeah, I just work and family and everything, and so I'm super excited to join LCB. So thank you.
Well, we're excited to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome, Gloria. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria. Just a couple other updates. I won't be with you next Wednesday at EMT. I'll be out of the state. So just a couple of things. Obviously, a lot of discussion this morning about the social equity rules that are coming before you tomorrow. And I think the only thing I would add to that is and you've said it several times, all of you, all the work that was done from the very beginning, from the first original CR 102 that was proposed. Kathy, I looked at the memo that you provided, all the attachments, and some of you have spoke to it. That's the kind of detailed work that we need in this agency. the comparatives that show what did we originally come up with and what are we proposing today, makes it easier for everybody, including staff and the public, to understand the changes that we're proposing. So I just, that kind of detail that's been here since you came to this agency helps us in this effort to do these most important rules around this effort in the agency. Also, probably tomorrow, as the board and staff is aware, we're looking at 3 specific proposals for agency request legislation. Those will be provided to our stakeholders in that typical process. If you're not aware, we give our stakeholders, licensees, and all stakeholders who have an interest the opportunity to give us feedback on our 3 proposals. We'll give them several weeks to give us that feedback, and then we'll bring that back to staff and the board if there are any changes that we want to propose. Just so you know, that will be happening likely tomorrow. Also, our Director of Enforcement, Chandra Brady, provided last week a briefing to members of Congress that was organized by the U.S. Cannabis Council, urging them to adopt and take congressional action on the Safe Banking Act. Just wanted to share with you that that went very well. Also, Jim Morgan, our CFO, has spent some time with Guam last week. Guam is a member of CANRA, as you may recall, but they're also in the process of putting their program together for cannabis. And we've been very helpful in helping them understand. They've got a couple of state banks that are interested in banking that industry. So Jim and also Roberta Hollingsworth from DFI was able to do a briefing with Guam to help them understand, mostly with the banking folks there and the regulators, how to make that successful. And I'm kind of proud to say we're the one state in the country that has figured this out. All of the excise tax is paid electronically. No longer does anyone have to bring cash to the board. And that's 3 months. I think we've been able to do that in my discussions with Jim this morning. And that has to do with all the work that you all did as an agency and other agencies like DFI to try to do everything we can to provide banking services to the cannabis industry. So those are the things I would share with you today. And of course, would take any questions that you would have. But again, another accolade for Ollie and all the work that she's done in helping us figure out how to revise the social equity rules. To remember, the purpose of this is to allow folks into this industry to not have access in the beginning. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Any questions for Rick on what he presented or anything else? It's question time, just like in Parliament. Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Rick. And we're to the last item on our agenda, which is board member and executive assistant reports. Dustin, anything to report today?
Nothing for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. The board members, anything to add? See.
No, I'm just not, I'm gonna be out all next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Okay, great. Well, with that, then I have nothing. We will adjourn the board caucus meeting for August 2nd, 2022. Be back here same time tomorrow for the board meeting. Thank you all. See you then.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.